Hey all, James here. Real quick before I get started on the reading of Chapter 2, so everyone has to know that next month is Christmas month, so I've been writing a Christmas-related story, and I'm thinking about maybe at some point in December sharing it. So let me know in the comments below if you would like for me to read that story, or not. Give me a thumbs down if you don't want me to read it. Okay, and the week after Thanksgiving, Casey and I are going to be going to a fantasy-themed cottage in Tennessee, so I am planning to write a story based on that, so do look forward to that one, because I am going to be sharing that one on the channel. And, me sharing these stories would give me more time to write Aiden's stories, because it is nowhere to being complete. So these stories could help in that front, because it will come to a point where if I continued reading stories, Aiden's story, we'd be doing a kind of a Star Wars skipping between chapters. I kind of don't want to do that. So yeah, okay, I think that was all I have to update. So with all that said, let's get to the reading. Chapter 2, Into the Void. There was a purple mirror in the shape of a diamond, floating in the abyss. It rocked back and forth until it shattered into 1,000 purple shards of glass. Aiden and Christopher stood upon a rocky ledge on the high cliffs of Mountain Dirge. Aiden was bundled in a thick coat, holding his father's hand, waving goodbye to a man in armor. The armored man turned, returning a wave of his own. In the distance was the grand city of Telegem that sat upon islands in the sky. Snow fell from the gray clouds the city was set against. Father and son stood, watching the figure grow smaller and smaller into the distance. Their breath produced white puffs as they breathed. "Come, Aiden, we must return home. Enola is not for us." Aiden shivered, looking back one last time at the world next door to Earth. Aiden awoke from his dream to the low rumble of thunder. The thunder was followed by the clicking of claws on the stairs, and Calder darted into Aiden's room and into the bed. Calder's brown, almond-shaped eyes were wide with fear, and he tilted his head to the side, looking into the direction the thunder had shook the house. Aiden scratched the dog's floppy ears. "It's just a thunderstorm," he said. He couldn't help but think of the vivid dream that he had just had. He was glad it was only just the dreams. At least it wasn't the nightmares that he had increasingly been having. The thunder sounds like something wanted out. Aiden shook the thought from his head. It wasn't his thought, and he didn't want the thought in his head. It was only a thunderstorm, he repeated, trying to calm himself, as much as the dog. That dream wasn't just a dream. It was like a vivid memory. It wasn't the first time. In the past, he had even dreamed of being in someone else's perspective. But these people he had dreamed of, he couldn't put a name to their faces, nor where they were within the dream. Once more he tried to push these thoughts from his head. The best way of doing so was by distracting himself, and Calder would serve that purpose quite well. "I'm sorry," Aiden said to Calder. "Storms scare me too." "No, something wants out," Calder's whine seemed to say. Aiden jumped from the bed away from Calder. The dog remained where he was. Aiden in his plaid pajamas looked down at the dog. Aiden ran his hands through his mess of brunette hair. Throughout Aiden's life, he thought he could hear the thoughts of animals. It was the kind of thing you kept to oneself. He would tell himself that it was his imagination, that there was nothing to worry about. He was completely normal. He just suffered from an overactive imagination. He had heard that a lot. A low rumble of thunder distracted Aidan from his train of worry thoughts. Through the window there is a dark cloud growing in the gulf. Aidan stares out across the darkness, gathering in the direction of the gulf. "We should go outside while we can, Calder," he said, turning back to his dog. "Once it actually starts, you will not want to go outside. We both know you will find somewhere to go inside, so come on, let's go." "I should probably give you your anxiety meds," thought Aidan, as he changed into a pair of blue jeans. Calder whined, as if he heard Aidan's thought. Aidan exited his room, followed reluctantly by Calder. They stopped outside Christopher's room. The door was ajar. "Dad?" asked Aidan. There was no reply. He called out to him once again as he pushed the door open. His father's room was neat and orderly, and Christopher was not in the room. "He must be out getting some things before the storm gets started," Aidan told Calder. The pair left the room, and they descended down the stairs and into the kitchen. As he searched for the anxiety pills, Aidan became lost in thought of when Calder came to be in his life. Christopher had surprised Aidan with Calder when he had turned 15. "I know that making friends isn't very easy for you, which is fine, but I thought you could use some company." "There is no better company than that of a dog," Christopher had said, holding a puppy. They had become friends instantly. Aidan and Calder spent most of their time in the courtyard of their southern estate. The pair ran about at play. Calder had a stuffed pink mouse that Aidan had named Wanda. Wanda would squeak. He would run from the stairwell that led into the house to the opposite end of the small enclosed courtyard, where there was a small fountain. He would squeeze it, and Wanda would squeal. Calder, usually at Aidan's heel, would bark back at the stuffed animal. They went back and forth, and when they tired, they would sit upon the ground to play tug-of-war. Unfortunately, though, Wanda had disappeared from the courtyard, though it wasn't the only item to seem to have disappeared out of thin air. When Aidan had found the anxiety pills, he wrapped it with a slice of cheese. The sound of the cheese wrapper made the thought of the anxiety pill and thunder slip from Calder's mind. All he cared about was getting that cheese. He spun around in a circle. When Aidan gave Calder the cheese, it looked like he didn't even chew. It went straight down his throat. He happily followed Aidan, prancing. When the thunder crashed, he didn't even flinch. All he cared about was the possibility of more food. "Let's go outside, Calder." The dog followed, tail wagging. The Andrus estate was located upon a hill that overlooked the Mississippi River. The water it is choppy, and the wind running across it is both warm and has a slight chill to it. Aidan can smell the stench of it, a mixture of pollution and fish. In the courtyard there was a small tree growing near the edges of the walled-in yard. They whipped about in the wind. At the center of the fountain was a statue of a busty woman that had disappeared from the courtyard recently. It had upset Aidan's father when he had learned of its disappearance. The goddess, he had called the statue. There were black chairs, a table, and flower pots, some overturned. It was Calder that first noticed something was not right. Aidan opened the front door to let the dog out into the courtyard. Calder darted down the stairs, his ears flopping about as he went. Just as Aidan was going to close the door, Calder began to bark. Aidan didn't think much of his barking. Calder had a tendency to bark at the frogs in the fountain, and he would carry on for hours. Sometimes Aidan would find Calder at the cast-iron gate that led out into the driveway, with his head jutting out of the gate, barking at squirrels and birds. But this time, something told him that Calder's bark was something else. He could hear a voice within his mind. "The dark is out! The dark! Danger! Dark! Danger!" Calder's warning of the dark reminded Aidan of his nightmares. In his nightmares he stood alone, in a darkness that pressed down on him from all sides. From behind there was a warm breath that made him choke upon its stench. A dark shadow would restrain his wrists and ankles, pulling him in all directions, threatening to render him apart. Then one of the shadows overpowered the rest, suspending him in midair by his ankles. Spiders rained down from above. "The dark is out! The dark!" Calder's barks seemed to say. Aidan tried pushing it out, but it became harder and harder. Calder's bark became more frantic. He swung open the door and went to Calder. He stepped off the bottommost stair. Just as he was about to scold the dog and tell him to hush, Aidan saw what it was that he was carrying on about. Beneath the stairwell, he saw the air itself had opened. It looked as if there was a tear, like a clawed creature ran its talons down a curtain, shredding it. The opening, a tear, it is dark, yet there is a purple pulsing light. Calder whined as Aidan approached. Without thinking about what he was doing, he reached out to touch this tear. He did not know what to expect. Maybe he would pass through it, but there seemed to be an invisible wall. Aidan realized there was a purple glass over the tear. Calder watched, with tail tucked between his legs. The dog felt uneasy. Aidan, he could feel the uneasiness wash over him. "Is this the darkness?" Aidan asked Calder. The dog growled. There was a clash and flash of lightning that streaked across the sky, and a boom of thunder. The wind picked up. Then the tear began to produce a sound like the tapping of claws upon glass. But from the other side of it, a bolt of lightning tore unto and through the barrier, and through him. Or did it come from the other side? Yet Aidan did not flinch, neither was he shocked by the bolt. The unseen barrier, Aidan thought he saw it shatter into purple shards that disappeared before reaching the ground. Then there was a purple mist that came from the tear, as if being carried by a wind being produced from within. There was then a darkness that reached out with unseen tendrils and pulled at Aidan, beckoning. He walked forward, reached out, and touched it once more. The barrier was gone. It had indeed shattered. Aidan walked through the void, letting those tendrils lead him. Calder remained behind, barking at the tear, where Aidan had disappeared. After a short time, Calder followed. On the opposite side of the tear, the darkness seemed to stretch for eternity. Behind him through the tear was the courtyard. The void. It was Christopher's voice. In the darkness, it wasn't complete darkness. Ahead of him was a beam of light, like a spotlight shining down on a performer upon a stage. Christopher stood in the middle of this light. His back is toward Aidan, unaware that he is being approached. His attention was on what was in front of him, dancing orbs of light. Aidan watched their zooming motion that seemed to mesmerize. All the while, Calder continued to whimper, still following Aidan's every step. Aidan doesn't watch where his feet is being placed, unaware of his surroundings or what could be lurking in the shadows. He could hear Calder's drugged thoughts start to fade. The darkness, the dark, arc, bark, bark. Calder's drugs had finally kicked in. There was only his barking. As he approached his father, he saw the statue of the goddess. It leaned, lopsided upon the black sand and stone of this place. "Dad?" he asked, stopping. for only a brief moment to consider the statue. Aidan passed a lawn chair, potted plant, and a pair of garden shears, all the items that had disappeared from the courtyard. So this is where things had been disappearing to. Aidan continued approaching his father, who seemed to still be unaware of his son. There was a loud squeal from beneath his feet, startling both Aidan and Christopher, who jumped. The squeak silenced Calder's bark, who tilted his head at the source of the loud sound. Beneath his foot was something pink and flattened beneath him. Lifting up his foot, it squealed loudly once more. The object filled back into its regular, unflattened form. Calder's tail wagging, he ran over to the thing that squeaked, sniffing it. It was Wanda. Calder gently lifted it up with his mouth, a pink mouse in his mouth. Calder, he ran in circles, reunited with his friend. The dog stopped, remembering where he was, who looked toward Aidan and Christopher, their backs toward the tear that they had come from. He quickly hung his head, Wanda still in his mouth, tail tucked back between his legs, when he had put it back together, that they would not be leaving just yet. Christopher wore black pants and what looked like a silk shirt with fancy buttons. Over one shoulder, a crimson cape. There was an oval pin holding the cape to his shoulder. On the pin was a sword facing upward, wrapped with a red cloth. On his feet he wore black boots, straps wrapped around his shins, with pointed steel toes. Around his waist is a leather belt, and what Aidan thought looked like a scabbard and longsword. Aidan moved to stand next to his father. Aidan saw at a closer inspection that these large orbs of light seemed alive, like giant lightning bugs. He felt like there was something in the darkness watching him. Calder hid between Aidan's legs. There was a second opening in the distance. You should not have come here, Aidan. It is dangerous here. Christopher glanced at Aidan momentarily before returning his attention to the darkness that surrounded them. There was a second opening in the distance. Aidan approached it, leaving his father behind, and looked through the opening like a window. Calder whined. On the other side of the tear, he saw there was a beach, its coast rocky. There was a mist that swirled about the air, a purple mist. "I've been here before," Aidan said aloud, pointing at the rocky beach. Aidan was led away from the rocky beach by a knight in armor. The sky was gray, and there was the low rumble of thunder. The knight eventually led Aidan up a path that became treacherous with rocks that tumbled beneath them, up a long, narrow mountain path, hand in hand. The knight led Aidan upward and upward. Christopher stood on a cliff edge, looking down past the rocky crags toward a plain that stretched far into the distance, farther than the eye could see. Standing just to the side of Christopher was a tear that led into darkness. Aidan turned back to his father and pointed at the darkness. "This place, I remember it, but the memory is distant. The memory is cloudy." Christopher turned back to Aidan and stood silent, watching Aidan, hand upon the hilt of his longsword. Aidan turned from the tear, looking about at the void, and the dark that surrounded them. Past the wisp that danced was a ruined structure. Dark figures moved about from within this ruin. "This can't be happening," Christopher said. "I thought you would be safe on Earth. I was a fool." In the darkness, there was a dark shadow that passed in Aidan's peripherals. When Aidan turned in that direction, he saw nothing. The orbs that lit the area seemed to make shadowy darkness shift even more. The dancing orbs of light shook off the discomfort of the darkness. Yet the light did not protect him. It brought only the comfort, and only momentarily. There was a rush of warm air that smelled of disease, the stench of decay that came from behind. He gagged. The orbs of light fled from the area, humming frantically. A stench came once more. It felt as if something breathed upon his neck. Christopher pulled forth his longsword, stepped 1 foot forward, blade held behind him, reaching out toward Aiden with his free hand. "Behind you!" shouted Christopher. "Run! Get out!" Aiden's legs was pulled from beneath him. The black earth rushed towards his face. Aiden's head exploded in pain from the impact. Dazed, vision blurred. Christopher ran towards Aiden's aid, but was not fast enough. Aiden was dragged back, then upward. When his vision cleared, he saw a figure that resembled the shape of a wraith. Cloaked in shadow, snake-like limbs wiggled about. A large tendril held Aiden before it. Aiden was brought within inches of what had to be a face. It peeked from beneath its hood. Yellowed eyes. Its breath was overwhelming. A second tendril appeared, moving like a serpent treading water. Calder had been barking throughout. His fur was raised upon his back. The dog charged, growling. A third tendril appeared, lashing out. Calder yelped. He crumbled as he was sent flying out into the darkness. "Calder!" shouted Aiden, whose heart rose into his throat. For the first time since being within the grasp of the wraith, Aiden struggled, pulling in the direction of Calder. Christopher circled around the cooling arms, seemingly unnoticed. The tendrils twisted around each of Aiden's limbs. It floated forward. Something from within appeared, a white, flashing gleam. All 4 of Aiden's limbs were being pulled in opposite directions, threatening to pull him apart like a bug. Christopher swung his sword in a downward arc with the strength of both arms. It screeched, flailing backward. Aiden was dropped to the ground. With a helping hand from Christopher, Aiden was pulled to his feet. All the while, the wraith had backed away, inspecting the tendril that barely remained attached. Leaning upon Christopher to remain standing upright, he was led to one of the openings. "You must leave this place," Christopher explained, holding his son's face firmly within a free hand. Aiden pushed away Christopher's hand. "Calder, we need to find Calder," pleaded Aiden. "Calder is lost to us, son," Christopher said harshly. The wraith screamed. It sounded as if it had spoke. Slowly it approached, floating. Aiden was pushed through the tear as tendrils wrapped around Christopher's chest. Aiden reached out, hoping to pull his father with him through the tear. He only grabbed air. Christopher, with a slash of his sword, sealed the tear. Then there was only darkness.